Okay, I've come up with another example for rate of change using a table to explain a couple things that I did not mention yesterday in the introduction to rate of change. First thing I want to mention is that it's not always X and Y columns. Because remember from the last standard where we were substituting numbers into a function, the function is usually represented by a letter like F for function, and then parentheses X, meaning you could substitute a number in for X. Now, it doesn't always have to be F. Like if you have a problem that has more than one function in it, they're not going to be both called F. You got to know which one's which. So it might be G. G is probably the second most common letter that gets used for functions, but really it could be any letter. This could be any letter to represent any type of function. So like here I'm talking about basketball. Maybe I want to use a B for baskets. Whatever. It doesn't matter. You can use whatever letter you want to describe your function. And then the X just means you're substituting into here. So really that could be any letter too. Like if this was say an S for shots, then you would put an S here. All right, so the letters don't matter as much as the representation. You have the letter that you're using to represent the variable in your problem. So here I'm representing, X is representing my age. And then it's a function of how many shots do I make out of 100 depending on my age. Okay, so that's one thing I wanted to say is don't be confused if you see an F of X here instead of a Y. It means the same thing just like it did on the last test. All right, the next thing I wanted to show you is that your rate of change could be a negative number, which we're going to have here. So let's look at this chart. All right, I used to play basketball. When I was in high school, I was decent. I was like a 70% foul shot shooter. That means I would make, on average, 70 out of 100 shots. So when I was 15 years old, X represents my age. When I was 15, I would make about 70 shots out of 100. And then I went to college and played even more than I did in high school, just with my friends, but I would play a lot, and I got even better. I just got a little bit, I don't know, probably just from practice, probably just from playing more, because I played other sports in high school, but so I got a little bit better. So 10 years later, I was even better. And then I kind of stopped playing, so I just got worse, like a lot worse. And then I just got old, and now it's like, I think my shoulder's broken or something. I can barely even shoot the ball. So now I'm like half as good as I used to be when I was my best. But regardless, you could figure out rates of change from this. So say here's a term that you might see as average rate of change. Average just means that it's not the same between every interval. So for example, I made these intervals of my age 10. So I started at 15 and then another 10 years, and then another 10 years, and then another 10 years. But it's not always the same. For the first 10 years, from when I was 15 to 25, I got better, plus 10. I increased by 10. But then the next 10 years, I got worse. I decreased by 25, so that's a negative 25. And then I got worse again over the next 10 years. I hate to see where I'm going to be 10 years from now. All right, so now that was another 15 shots less over the next 10 years. So you have to look at the given intervals, and when they say intervals, when you see the term interval or average rate of change, they're always talking about the X. So if they say, what was the difference between 25 and 30, you're not looking for 25 and 30 in the Y column. You're looking for the numbers that they want you to look at the chart, to judge the chart by, in the X column. All right, so let's say they say, what was the average rate of change? Average rate of change between 15 and 35, between ages 15 and 35. Well, that could be a tough one at first glance because you could say, well, I don't know, it got better for the first half, but then got worse for the second half. So I don't know, which one do I pick? They're different. And that's why it's confusing. So you don't look at it as each individual change. You look at it as from here to there, the two numbers that they give you, from 15 to 35. So you really just kind of forget about this middle number in a problem like that. You're not even worried about the stuff that comes in between there. If they're asking you from one point to the next, the stuff in the between doesn't even matter. So from 15 to 35, what was the rate of change? Well, it was from 70 to 55. It was minus 15 between those intervals of time, between 15 and 35. And what was the change in the x column, our denominator? Remember, it's still y over x, still rise over run. It was 20 years. So during this 20-year period, what was the average rate of change? Well, it was negative 15 over a positive 20. A negative over a positive gives you a negative fraction. So my average rate of change was negative 15 over 20. Now, you don't have to turn that into a decimal, but you do have to reduce it. So 15 over 20 does reduce to negative 3/4. That's your average rate of change between those intervals. What this is saying is y represents the rise, the shots made. 4 represents the run, the age. So this is saying 3 shots every 4 years, but it's negative. So it actually means that I'm getting 3 shots worse every 4 years on this average span of time. On an average now. Remember, this is an average. So it doesn't mean that when I was 19, I made 3 shots less than I did when I was 15. All right. It doesn't follow it constantly. It's not a constant rate of change. It's an average rate of change. So you just take the whole period of time that they want you to take, the whole change during that period of time, make a fraction out of it, reduce it. That means on average, I was losing 3 shots every 4 years. I might have gained some at first, but then I lost a lot, and I ended up on an average of losing 3 every 4 years. All right, so hopefully that answers some of the questions that I received from yesterday's problems, which I assume there would be questions because that was only an introduction. This dives a little bit deeper into it. It's still the same concept. Just don't be confused if that's not a y. And don't be afraid to have a negative number. If these numbers are decreasing and these numbers are increasing, it's going to be negative because you're going to have a negative over a positive. All right, so hopefully you guys do a little better today.